Hola, welcome. This is Dino Delano. Today, we are going to go into this in depth. I'm now able to post on YouTube longer videos. We're going to go into the process of how many beliefs that we have downloaded into our system, have been downloaded into us in that sense since childhood, cause trauma within the mind-body system. But you'll also, by the end of this video, you will begin to understand how to release that trauma, how to change these things, whether that trauma occurred through accident, through rape, or what have you. All right, warning. If we buy into a belief that we need something to be connected to life or the spiritual, we will feel disconnected. In other words, if some religion or philosophy or psychological belief tells you that you need this in order to be connected to life, and you believe it, you will feel disconnected. The fact is, if you're breathing, you are connected. Now think about that. If you are breathing, you are connected to life. What causes us to feel as though we are not connected is the beliefs that we have. And certainly there's things that we can do in our life that will give us a greater sense of connection and so on. But we'll go more into that as we go along. Kriya, or energetic movement. For those of you familiar with yoga, you've maybe heard the terms kriya or kriya, or I call them energetic movements. These movements that happen, the body will sometimes begin to jerk in Kundalini opening. Sometimes when you go to bed at night and you're starting to fall asleep, sometimes you might feel your body jerking. What happens is that there is a buildup of energy, and as we relax, as we go into a deeper state, the body releases it, and it causes that jerking, or what is called kriyas. But there's more to it than that. With the person who is going through a Kundalini experience, those kriyas or kriyas, which I've had for many years on and off, are working through blocks in the mind-body system. What causes trauma, by the way? Well, think of it in this way, and let's imagine that the tiger in the jungle begins to chase the antelope. Well, of course, the antelope runs, doesn't it? It wants to get away. In the process of running and trying to escape getting killed, it burns off the energy. And let's imagine also that that antelope does get away. Well, if you were to watch it in this process, you would see that once the danger is over, the body would be shaking. And in that process, the antelope is releasing and letting go of that excess adrenaline that has been pumped into the mind-body system in order to give it the energy in order to get away from the danger. Now, what do we do, though, as humans? As humans, we mostly don't do that. We might have a rape, we might have an accident, we might have had beatings in childhood, and we might have had a number of downloads of beliefs in our childhood that literally create trauma. And I'll talk more about that here in just a moment. What happens, because we hold on to the feelings, because those feelings are not expressed out through running, trying to get away, or anger, let's say, or maybe crying would be another way to release those feelings and those emotions. It becomes part of the mind-body system. In other words, it becomes a part of your cellular structure. And in fact, it begins to mold the body. In trauma, the energetic memory becomes embedded into the mind, body, and the emotions. In other words, your traumas, your beliefs, your downloads that you've had, positive or negative, cause you to think in certain ways, cause you and I to see the world in a particular way. As a very simple example, during the 50s, I was stationed down in Mobile, Alabama, where there was 4 bathrooms, 2 water fountains, the blacks rode on the back of the bus, and so on. In other words, those people, the white people I'm speaking of course, were conditioned. They had downloads from the time that they were little kids that blacks were lesser, that blacks were not as good at us. And of course, they what? Responded in their thinking, they responded emotionally, they responded in action to those beliefs. So again, realizing that structure determines function. And the beliefs that we have in the mind-body system cause the structures that we have. Here is a very simple example. Someone may have a lot of guilt, may have a lot of resistance, may have a lot of conditioning and programming that sex is bad, sex is not good, sex is dirty, and a whole lot of other things. And oftentimes that person may have an overload of weight in the hip area or other areas of the body, in fact. In other words, that excess weight is literally protecting them from their sexual feelings. A better way of saying it is that even though they might be having sex, it inhibits them from feeling fully sexual. In other words, feeling the energies, the pleasure, the eroticism fully, and that is happening again because of what they think and they believe. What we believe determines the structure of our whole mind-body system, and it also determines how we feel and think within that mind-body system. So, people talk about beliefs as though it were some superficial thing. Oh yeah, well I believe this once and so on, and oh yeah, I can change my thinking. It's not really all that simple, in all honesty. What the Kundalini process does, and when I say Kundalini, I could say chi, I could say life energy, I could use a lot of terms for it, but what life energy does in the mind-body system, it amplifies the blocks that we have. Now, what do I mean by that? In amplifying our blocks, in amplifying areas where we are holding energy, in other words, we're not allowing it to flow freely, maybe the sexual area, maybe the heart area, maybe the creative area and what we call the throat chakra. In that process of amplification, it tries to get us to perceive and to understand what the block is, so that we can what? Do something to remove it, to transform it, to change it. Imagine you are a child. You're innocent and you're open. Here's a way of saying it. At that time in our life, we had a Santa Claus kind of mind. We had a sort of innocent mind, didn't we? In other words, at 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. In other words, we took it, what? All in. I mean, we were like dogs. We wanted to know this. We wanted to see that. And what we were told, we generally believed. Now, particularly with parents and oftentimes with teachers, with parents, because we wanted them to what? Love us. We wanted them to feel good toward us. So even though sometimes maybe a belief or something that we were perceiving did not feel maybe quite right or good, oftentimes we would give up our autonomy in order to be what? Loved and accepted by those around us. So during those times, we were like, what I call Santa Claus beliefs, right? In other words, we believed, even though it may not have been true. Also, you at that point in time did not have a critical mind. We don't really begin to develop the critical mind until 6 a little bit, and then 7 and 8 and so on. And as time goes on, we begin to move more into what is called the beta brainwaves. And in beta brainwaves, we begin to develop a mind that can say, hey, I think that's nonsense. Oh yeah, that looks right. That makes sense to me, and so on. But we don't have that process, so we are open. Here's another way of saying it. A lot of people have what I would call negativity or resistance toward hypnosis. The fact is that during that time, from the time that we were born, even before, in utero, in fact, But during that time, up until 5, 6 years of age, we are in a state of total hypnosis. In other words, we are in a state of where we are taking it all in. Now, memory of what you learned or the trauma is unconscious. Think about this. Well, let me ask you this question. How did you learn to walk? How did you learn to talk? Fact is, you don't remember. I don't remember. In other words, during the time that I was learning to walk, I probably fell quite often, probably skinned my knees, maybe bumped my head on the table, cried. We did all of those things, but we don't recall it. What do you do when you want to walk? Well, you just get up and walk. If you want to ask somebody something, you simply open your mouth and do it. The memory of how you put that together, of how you learned, has now become what? Unconscious. A better way of saying it, I think, rather than calling it the subconscious or the unconscious mind, is that it is like a library of information. It is like the software on your computer. Now, you may have 15, 20, 30, 40 pieces of software on your computer, but you don't use them all at one time. So in other words, the computer is not what? Aware of every piece of software all of the time. It only becomes aware of that piece of software or that information when you what? Bring it up and you begin to use it. So the subconscious in that sense is like this amazing library of information, experience, feeling, emotion, so on, that we have gathered during our lifetimes. Belief directs our thinking, action, and feelings. Let me say that again. Belief directs our thinking, actions, and feelings. So your emotions then, or I love the word E-motion, are literally powered by what you and I believe. Again, going back to the thing that I mentioned about being in Alabama in the 50s, is their resistance toward black people, their hate toward black people, their prejudice toward black people. Those emotions were powered by what? Their beliefs. Same is true as somebody who says, you know, relationships are so easy. I meet people so easily. I develop relationships easily, whether that be, you know, intimate, loving relationships, sexual relationships, or other, etc. And some people say, you know, God, it is so difficult for me to have relationships, and I really have difficulty relating with people. That is powered by what you believe. Understand, though, that oftentimes what we believe has also been input, has also been experienced by experience. By experiences, literally, that we've had in reality. In other words, those experiences have caused you to feel and think in a particular way. Let's look at this chart, for instance, and it says hell. Now, a lot of people really do believe in hell. In other words, they believe that when they die, they are going to go to hell or go to purgatory for their sins, their mistakes, so on. If you're maybe in another form of religion, you might believe that it's karma, that you're going to have to pay for your karma. You're going to have to go through many lifetimes and so on. Now, as I said before, a belief has depth to it. A belief has roots to it. In other words, it is rooted deeply into the nature, into the ground of your mind-body system. All right? So let's say that we have a belief in karma, in hell, or purgatory, or that we're going to have to somehow or another pay for the mistakes that we have made. That leads to what? Fear and punishment. In other words, we fear punishment. We fear that somehow or another, if we do something wrong, God, I'm going to have to somehow or another pay for that. Again, whether we call it karma or purgatory or whatever, it's one really in the same. Fear of the Creator. Now we become literally afraid of creation, whether we call that Creator God or Yahoo, or whatever the case may be, whatever our particular belief is, we now become afraid of that entity, of that idea. In that sense, we literally become afraid of whom? Ourselves. Because at some level, we know that we are a part of that life force. We are a part of that creative energy. We are a part of creation itself. So we become afraid, literally, of our own functions, our own energies, our own expressions. Sometimes it causes, with some people, and I want to be careful how we're approaching this, in the sense that how it affects every individual is very different. It depends upon your beliefs. It depends upon your background. It depends upon experiences that you and I have had as we were growing up. If someone came from a very, very fearful, destructive background, some of these beliefs might affect them even more deeply, even more than somebody else who has come from a background of where they've had a lot of self-reliance, a lot of confidence, and so forth. With some people, it causes them to always be looking over their shoulder, they look for an enemy. Now, think of that in larger terms. Think of that as a collective belief structure as to what is happening in our world today. Many nations, politicians, governments, etc., so on, are what? Continually looking for an enemy. When I was in the military, one of the things that we did is that we used to listen to Russia during the Cold War. Yeah, because we were looking what? For a problem. We were looking for an enemy. It's like the person who is a hypochondriac. They're always looking for what? A disease that they might have. So these ideas and these feelings are not just beliefs. They affect every part of us to varying degrees, as I have just said. In fact, some of these beliefs cause trauma within the mind-body system. Trauma, let's say it another way, it causes blocks. It causes us to not be freely moving with our energy and feelings in life. In that sense, it creates a general fear of life. Here's another one. And I'm not going to cover a whole lot of beliefs. I'm going to cover just a few here, but you will begin to get the idea that this is a very important subject if you want to live as free as possible. Were you born with clothes on? I've never seen anybody born with clothes on. Well, when did you and I learn that it was wrong? Now, if nudity is wrong, that makes who wrong? That makes me wrong. Somehow or another, the great creator, or whatever, again, label we wish to use, made a mistake. It did something wrong. There's something wrong with that. Those kinds of beliefs, what? Cause us to feel in a particular way toward ourselves, through our bodies. We feel shame. In many instances, if we're caught nude, or we're caught maybe on the side of the road somewhere because we had to take a leak, right? And somebody drives by, oh my God. And you watch people respond in these ways. There is at some level, to varying degrees, and again, not with all people, as I said before, a rejection of the body. Now, if we reject the body, we at some level are also rejecting healing within that mind-body structure. In other words, the healing process, which is a natural process to the body, the creative process, which is a natural process to us as human beings, if we have rejection in our idea of who we are, what we are, the way we at some level affect all levels of our experience. Again, as I said before, in degrees depending upon the individual. Those kinds of ideas and beliefs often create a Puritanism. In other words, it creates a fear. It creates a fear of sexuality. It creates a fear of those erotic feelings. It creates even a fear of joy, and it causes control. That's why you see in some religious structures they have become fanatics in trying to control everything. If you look at many of the belief structures that run through many religious structures, there is one control after another, after another, after another. Those controls tell us that at some level we do not trust human life. We do not trust ourselves as human beings. And again, only you can determine where that is for you as an individual. If nudity is wrong, what does that make me? If nudity is wrong, what does that make you? Sex. Ah, yes, sex. Our beliefs about sex create our feelings about sex. You know, there's some studies that were done which I found very interesting, and I've talked to a lot of women about this. And the study said that about 50% of the female population, I'm talking about America now, would rather go shopping than have sex. Now, what does that tell us about something that is incredibly pleasurable, joyful, if we are open to it? What does that tell us? If we have guilt in our bodies, it becomes uptight. Let me say that again. Guilt causes us to feel what? Closed, tight. We feel shame. We feel all of these kinds of emotions. In many men, guilt causes tightness down in the pelvic area. Now, if you cause tightness in the pelvic area, it means that you are resisting what? The movement of life energy in that area, which is one of the reasons, I'm not saying the total, but it was one of the reasons why many men have problems with their prostrate. Because if you cut off the energy flow, just like if you were to cut off the blood flow to a particular area of the body, which it does that also, stress does that, doesn't it? When you get stressed, you get fearful. When you get fearful, don't you notice that sometimes your hands and feet become what? Cold. Cold feet, we've heard that term. In women, it causes other kinds of problems. It can create breast problems. It can create problems in the genital area and so on. So, can we now begin to understand how really important it is for us as human beings, if we want liberation, that is, if we want to be free, if we want to be creative, if we want to create a life that is peaceful, joyful, loving, open, is it important then for us as human beings to really understand our beliefs? That's a question. I'll let you answer it. Sex is the root chakra, a center of healing and creativity. Think about it. In sex, we create babies. So it is a creative energy. Not only is it a creative energy, but it is a healing energy. Think of a tree. That's why I put a tree up on this particular one. A tree gathers its strength and its nourishment from what? Through its roots. Now we call sex the root chakra. It is in the root chakra, comes from the root chakra. In other words, we derive our vitality, we derive our creativity, we derive our feelings and so many other things from what? From that sexual area. Think of it, here's a way to think about it. When you watch some of the actors, actresses, musicians, is probably a good one, like Michael Jackson maybe is an example, Sammy Davis Jr. when he was alive. You watch these people on stage and wow, I mean, you can see that sensuality. I'm not saying sexuality, I'm saying sensuality. In other words, they are expressing in movement, in dance, and so on, in voice, in their singing, in their music. They are expressing that creative, sexual, sensual energy. And we as human beings, when we begin to understand that, we understand how we are blocking it or getting in the way of it, the beliefs and feelings that we might have, we can change them. Misery loves company. Who stole the pleasure principle? Let's think about pleasure, all right? Sex without guilt is wonderful, right? It's beautiful, but oftentimes people have to smoke a lot of marijuana, drink a lot of booze, do this, and I'm not against marijuana, that's not what I'm saying. But they have to do all sorts of things to kind of what? Push the guilt aside so that they can finally get to pleasure the sex. And sometimes the use of what they're using in order to do that sometimes overcomes them so much that the next day they have forgotten the pleasure that they had. How about the joy of food? Wow, to be able to eat a meal, corn on the cob, mashed potatoes, peas and carrots. So I remember when I was a kid, I hated vegetables. I mean, hated them. Understandable. They all came out of a can and they tasted awful. Once I began to taste natural vegetables, I realized how wonderful they are. In that, I begin to experience another pleasure of life. How about the warmth of the sun on a cold day when you're sitting in the car and it comes through the window and it begins to warm your body and it feels so good. A hug, a kiss, creative expression when you've created a new painting or a new idea or a new poem or whatever. And you look at it and someone looks at it and they say, oh, that's great, isn't that beautiful? Wow, we feel good. Pleasure gives us the feeling that life is worth living. Come on, think about that for a moment. Pleasure gives us the feeling that life is worth living. Now, considering that, or looking at the opposite of that, conversely, if we look at what is taking place in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and much of what has gone on around the world in these wars, what are we creating in this? We are creating people growing up feeling that life is not worthwhile, that life is tough, life is painful, so on. Many of our religious beliefs come out of that idea. Many monks, as an example, get into the monastery to what? Escape the drudgery, escape the pain, escape the difficulty of having to go get a meal to earn a living, and so on. And particularly more in what we call, quote, third world countries. And I've spent a lot of time in many Asian countries and many places around the world. So I know what I'm talking about from experience. By the way, the information that I am sharing with you today is not gotten out of a psychology book. I spent 7 years of my life in deep, dark depression. For whatever reason, I won't go into it now, I made the decision not to use pharmaceuticals to cover it up, to try to get rid of it. But in the process, I learned how to transform those feelings into feelings of joy, of pleasure. I learned because I hated life. I had grown up in a childhood of a lot of beatings, both physically and emotionally. So I did not have a great attitude about life in that sense, from a feeling level. So my process of learning how to transform that is what has brought me into the human potential movement since 1972. Build on what you have, not what you don't have. Now, if you came onto my property and you said, I'm going to build a house on your property, I'd say, get out of here, right? Or if you did that to your neighbor or the person down the street, they'd think you're crazy. They'd say, build on your own property. What am I getting at? That little metaphor can really, if that really penetrates your understanding, what I'm saying is, build on what you have, not what you don't have. If you're feeling unloved, discover some place where someone loves you. Maybe it's one of your children, or maybe it's a grandmother, maybe it's your cat. But look at that. Look at the love that comes from that animal or that person or that particular experience. If you're short on money, if you don't have any money, don't look at what you don't have. Look at what you do have. In other words, give a sense of pleasure, a sense of gratitude for that meal that you're eating, for that $1 or $10 or $30 that you do have. In other words, what we focus on creates more of that, doesn't it? When we're in a shitty mood and we concentrate on that shitty mood and we get around people that we maybe relate to, live with, and sometimes we even try to pass it around, like that thing that says, misery loves company. Well, if I were to go back to some religions where they taught misery, literally in the schools, they beat the children, they gave straps to the children, they hit them with sticks, they did all kinds of things, not because necessarily that these teachers were bad people or malicious. They were simply passing on their what? Their beliefs. They were passing on what they believed to be true. Understand that. Even though it didn't work well, even though it was dysfunctional, even though it created all sorts of problems, they were ignorant in that sense and sometimes, truthfully, stupid. Use anger creatively. Don't get rid of your anger. Don't get rid of your sorrow. Don't get rid of your pain. Use it. In other words, transform it into something different. That's what we are as human beings. We transform nature. We transform ideas. We transform beliefs. We literally transform the imagination. We imagine something and then we create it. We build it. We bring it out here. What was once in our mind, maybe a book, maybe a statue, maybe a sculpting, a painting, a sonata, whatever. What was once in here in our imagination now literally becomes what? It becomes real. We see it right out here. So we are constantly transforming. We are transformative experiences. We are transformative human beings. So use this in the same way. As I talked about the depression that I experienced for 7 years, I used it as a transformational experience to become better rather than using pharmaceuticals and drugs to hide the problem, which solves nothing, by the way. Creative transformation. All right, I want to share with you some actual methods, some actual things that you can do. One of the things that I did during those years in order to transform the anger and the rage and the hurt and the pain that I felt, I got into running. And I would run through the woods oftentimes. I'd run along creeks. And sometimes I'd pick up a stick and I would beat on that nun or that priest or that person in my life that put me down and made me feel wrong. And I'd beat him and I'd beat him and I'd beat him. And in my imagination, I would just beat the shit out of him. In other words, I got the what? Rage out. I released it rather than keeping it what? Inside of me. Rather than keeping it inside and festering into a disease. Get it out. Dance and music is a wonderful way to do that. There's several ways you can do it. You can do what I just talked about. You can, if you're feeling angry and enraged, play Beethoven and act it out, feel it out, and move through the music, move through the feelings. You might use maybe someone like Heart and listen to some of their music. You might imagine yourself dancing with a partner. You might imagine yourself feeling sexual and sensitive and loving with that partner during that music. That music does that for me, as you maybe could tell. Right? In other words, maybe you're working through feelings of guilt about sexuality. You can use that movement and that dance to work through it. Imagination reprograms your library, reprograms that subconscious mind. It gives it new feelings to go by, new feelings to springboard from. This is powerful stuff. Meditation. Why meditation? Because it quiets the whole mind-body system. And by allowing those thoughts to move by, to go through, pretty soon you begin to realize that your thoughts and your beliefs are not who you are. That they're constructs, they're downloads that you have taken in, but they're not who you are. And when you realize they're not who you are, you become even more liberated to be able to what? Change them. In other words, you're no longer stuck. You no longer feel like you will die if you give up this belief or this idea or this way of being or this job that you hate or whatever. Reprogramming. You can pick up my book, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. My book goes into all kinds of methods of reprogramming, of how you can change those feelings and those structures, those ideas. EFT is one of the more newly modern things, so to speak. You'd pick up a lot of ideas about that on YouTube. It will show you some ways to move through beliefs faster and quicker. God, if I had had many of these technologies like I write about in my book and that are around today, like EFT, as I mentioned, when I was going through all that depression, I probably could have gotten through it in maybe 6 months to a year rather than 7 years. So right now, today, you have some incredible technologies and methods and ways right at your fingertips to bring about the changes that you personally want in your life. Body work, rolfing, massage, tai chi, yoga, all of these things, because when you loosen the body, you allow it to become what? More flexible. Arthritis is the opposite of flexibility. The person who is in a lot of fear oftentimes creates arthritis. I did. I had it in both feet. I had to walk with crutches sometimes. Yes, that's right. So you see, I'm sharing with you some understanding, not that came out of a book, but by something that I have literally experienced through my life, and I know how to change it. I know, and I've shared these ideas, many of them, as I said, when I got into the Human Potential Movement in 1972, with well over 14,000 people in the seminar experience, and many, many, many more through YouTube and many other ways. All right, truth. Why is truth so important in your transformation? You've gone into St. Louis or Chicago or LA or Houston, and you're lost. You stop somebody on the street and you say, hey, how do I get to, and they say, you go to, and you do that. You go to, and you discover that's not where it was. Well, this person really wasn't too sure, but they didn't want to feel like they were, that they didn't want to look stupid, so they gave you what information they had. Just like the people that gave us information and downloads as we were growing up that they believed were true but had no validity, had no real reality in the world. They actually created more problems than not. So truth is a vital necessity in us being able to find our way to where we want to go. Somebody says, I'd really like to create a relationship with you. I like you as a person. I like talking to you, but I don't see us together. That's my truth. Well, yeah, I could consider that. By being truthful, by not trying to be a nice person, by not trying to be a good person, because good is often controlled by whose good are we looking at, and so on, we lose our own autonomy. we lose our own integrity. So truth is a major process of transformation. Discover the Magic in You. That's my book, one of my books. And if you'll go to coolzenhealing.com and click on the book, Discover the Magic in You, I will give you a lot of information about what's in that book. As I mentioned before, you can use EFT. There's many modalities out there. And I believe that I have some great information. That's why I'm sharing it with you. And you've just heard some of it. All right. Thank you for very, very much for listening to this video. I know it's probably been long, and I hope that you've gotten something out of this. Leave some comments, please, on YouTube about what you feel about this, whether you got something and comments if you didn't get something. All right. Thanks again. Dino Delano. Again, coolzenhealing.com.